Welcome, everybody. Kevin, thank you for that music. I like that it ended with Zoom, 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 Zoom in reference in some way to our Zoom lives. Thank you all for joining us on this virtual Webster Award. I'm just going to spotlight my video here. So good evening, and again, welcome to the Dartmouth Club of Washington, D.C.'s 2021 Virtual Webster Award. My name is Yasuto Shah. I'm a member of the class of 2015, and I'm the current president of the DC Club. The club is pleased to present the Webster Award to 4 highly deserving alumni who have made significant contributions in the healthcare field. As the board of directors considered the nominees for this year's award, we couldn't ignore the context of COVID-19 in which we've all lived over the past year. And if there's one thing that this pandemic has shown all of us, it is the importance of the contributions of those who choose to pursue a career in healthcare. Whether working directly on stemming the spread of COVID-19 or tackling other pressing health issues, the contributions to society of our healthcare workers could not be more greatly stated or appreciated during this time. In particular, we've been impressed by not just the work that these 4 doctors have done to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, but by their many accomplishments over decades of dedicated work in healthcare, with a heavy focus on research to develop insights that can be used to benefit a wide range of patients. Our Webster Award Chair, Meredith Benedict, will provide more information on the contributions of each Webster Award recipient. But to provide a brief summary, Dr. Leighton Chan has contributed heavily in the field of rehabilitation, including a focus on improving the recovery of injured warfighters. Dr. Peter Kilmarx has played a leading role in the international fight to prevent and control multiple pandemics, including Ebola, HIV/AIDS, and now COVID-19. Dr. Andrew Manis has identified new approaches for treating pain, including cancer pain management and developing neurosurgical intervention approaches to pain relief. And Dr. Henry Masur has contributed heavily in the field of critical care management, advancing the management of patients with HIV/AIDS, various emerging infections, and most recently, directly working on COVID-19. These are all just a brief summary, and as I mentioned, Meredith will discuss more. But we are honored to see Dartmouth alumni playing such leading roles in actively improving the lives of millions. Their dedication to serving the public in healthcare is exactly in line with the spirit of the Daniel Webster Award for Distinguished Public Service, and we're pleased to add them to the ranks of the recipients of this award. Finally, we do want to recognize that there are many Dartmouth alumni in the healthcare field who are actively working in the fight to end COVID-19. And if any of our attendees fall in that category, we sincerely thank you for your dedication to public service as well. Doctors Chan, Kilmarx, Manis, and Masur represent but a few of the many Dartmouth alumni whose dedication to scientific inquiry and commitment to patients has improved the lives of countless individuals and populations. And through recognizing their achievements, we do hope to also pay tribute to the roles that many other Dartmouth alumni in medicine, public health, and medical research have played in responding to the COVID-19 national emergency over the past year. So with that brief introduction, I'll turn it over to our Webster Award Chair, who really deserves the credit for putting this entire event together, Meredith Benedict, to more fully introduce our awardees.
Great, thank you, Yasuto. And I do not deserve all the credit. It definitely was a full-on committee that put this together. Welcome, everyone. I'm Meredith Benedict, class of '92, and I'm so pleased to recognize our awardees tonight. And before I did that, I wanted to give a little bit of history about the Webster Award for those that may not be familiar with it. The Webster Award for Distinguished Public Service is a signature event for this club. It's the brainchild of club leaders from the late 1980s, and since 1988, we've used it as a way to recognize the impact of Dartmouth men and women in our region on our nation and communities. And we've also used the event to support the scholarship fund, so really paying forward into the pipeline of future Dartmouth servant leaders by supporting access to a Dartmouth education. Over the years, we've recognized senators, members of Congress, members of the judiciary, cabinet officials, leaders in federal agencies, nonprofits, and in state and local government. And we accept nominations annually from any alumni in our region, and we would encourage anyone who falls in that category to submit nominations for future consideration through our website. Our award namesake, Daniel Webster, class of 1801, we all know for his famous advocacy for the college before the Supreme Court. As a servant to our young nation, Webster distinguished himself as an advocate, member of Congress, and Secretary of State. At various times, he represented New Hampshire and Massachusetts in Congress. He also served as Secretary of State under 3 presidents, and he argued over 200 cases before the US Supreme Court between 1814 and when he died in 1852. His lifelong dedication to public service for our country and our communities inspired us as we created the Webster Award for our club. And the awardees this evening all reflect in their chosen field of medicine the attributes that we seek in alumni to whom we want to give this award. And that is a record of significant and sustained service and accomplishment for the public's benefit, accomplishments made during employment by a government or nonprofit organization in the DC area, and demonstrated exemplary personal values and leadership qualities. Before I jump to recognize each of the awardees, I wanted to also take a minute to set a context for the world in which they're working, which is really different from the typical Washington, D.C. image that many of us have when we think about public service in Washington, and we might have an image of Capitol Hill or the White House. And most of us know, as Yasudo referenced, the contributions that the National Institutes of Health and other federal agencies have made that have been prominent in the news over the past year. But not everybody, I think, knows the NIH Clinical Center, which is where 3 of our awardees are based. And this is a research hospital and rehabilitation complex located on the NIH campus in Bethesda. So I wanted to give a little bit of background just as a way to set some of that context as we talk about the contributions and accomplishments of our awardees. Some call the NIH Clinical Center America's Research Hospital, and since 1953, through clinical research and really the translation of what's being discovered in the lab into better treatments, therapies, and intervention, that many groundbreaking achievements have occurred. And we'll hear about some of those this evening that our awardees have been directly involved in achieving. And I wanted to underscore as well that research at the clinical center will often focus on rare or emerging diseases, and the people that are served and benefiting initially from the work that's happening at NIH, and then as it scales to become part of treatment that is brought to populations around the country and around the world. Really, so often they're working to help people that aren't going to be able to find that kind of care and discovery anywhere else. The center is also a pipeline for training clinical investigators that go on to lead in advancing research at NIH and in many other locations. The practice of research as well as the practice of medicine is core to the work of all of these teams, and is something that each of these awardees from the clinical center have mentioned in speaking to why they chose the paths that they did. I also wanted to describe the background of the Fogarty Center at NIH, which is where Dr. Kilmarx is based, and that's focused on global health. And for over 50 years, funding from the Fogarty Center has supported US and international investigators in global health research, helped to build partnerships between research institutions in the US and abroad, and trained thousands of people for their roles as the next generation of scientists to address global health needs. And both the Clinical Center and the Fogarty Center are really critical to realizing NIH's mission to turn discovery into health. And with that, I'd like to recognize each of tonight's awardees. So I'll speak about each of you in turn, and then we will have you all as a group hold up your awards. So first up is Leighton Chan, class of '83, a 1990 graduate of UCLA School of Medicine. Since 2007, you've directed rehabilitation medicine at the NIH Clinical Center, where you manage a department of 100 staff and students who support NIH's intramural research program. Your passion for treating the whole patient is evident in the wide array of roles you play in the field. In addition to your role in the clinical center, You are a leader in the study of traumatic brain injury, serving as co-director of the Center for Neuroscience and Regenerative Medicine, one of the largest traumatic brain injury research centers in the world, with work that bridges NIH to the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center with a focus on improving the recovery of injured warfighters. A tenured senior scientist at NIH, your scholarship includes authorship of over 185 peer-reviewed articles. You are co-editor-in-chief of the Archives of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, the oldest and largest academic journal in the field of rehabilitation, and you are a member of the Institute of Medicine. You came to the NIH after many years on the faculty of the University of Washington, where you completed postgraduate training in physical medicine and rehabilitation. You additionally have a Master of Science in Rehabilitation Science and a Master of Public Health, and completed a selective Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholar Fellowship, and were a Congressional Fellow with the Honorable Jim McDermott. I'd be remiss if I didn't note your multi-generational Dartmouth history as well, with a grandfather who served as Dean of Humanities and a professor of religion and history. Your father, from the class of '54, served as the college architect and designed the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center. Thank you, Dr. Chan.
And I love that you have that one picture upside down, because that really represents what that weekend was all about at Moose Lock with my friends.
That's often and excellent. And one of the things I will say is I'm looking forward to getting into the conversation that you all are going to have with Susan, because there are many fun stories and banter amongst all of you that the committee has really enjoyed every time we've gathered with you. So we're looking forward to a chance to hear some more about that in the conversation. Dr. Kilmarx, class of 1983 and a medical degree in 1990 through the combined Dartmouth-Brown program, deputy director of the John Fogarty International Center at NIH. Peter, your journey to the Fogarty Center has been by way of Hanover, the Congo, Dartmouth Medical School, and many countries in which you served and visited while volunteering with the Peace Corps or working for the Centers for Disease Control. These include HIV prevention in Thailand, Botswana, and Zimbabwe, and leading the CDC Ebola response in Sierra Leone in 2014 as highlights. You completed your internship and residency in internal medicine and did a fellowship in infectious diseases at Johns Hopkins. While you were with the CDC beginning in 1994, you worked in Epidemic Intelligence Service in Atlanta, and then went on to really become global, directing CDC's Northern Thailand HIV STD Prevention Research Field Station from 1996 to 2002. Then the Botswana office from 2002 to 2005 to implement the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief and conducting HIV and tuberculosis prevention research. You served in the CDC Division of HIV/AIDS Prevention as the chief of the epidemiology branch from 2006 to 2010, and as senior advisor to the director for health reform from 2010 to 2011. And you finally, before coming to NIH, directed the CDC's Zimbabwe office from 2011 to 2015. And we'll look forward to hearing about your time at CDC as well as NIH and the impact there. At the Fogarty Center, you helped to strengthen the global health research capacity and train the next generation of global health research leaders. You've also served to inspire many Dartmouth students to careers in global health and public service through your mentorship, including your active participation in the Bridges program here in Washington, D.C. Your Dartmouth and New Hampshire ties are also very deep. I can't list them all, but a few notable ones I wanted to call out this evening are your cousin, Congresswoman Annie McLean Custer, class of '78, U.S. Representative for New Hampshire 2nd District, and she was our Webster Award winner in 2018. And your father, Robert Kilmarx, class of 1950, who was a Dartmouth trustee in the '70s and led in the college review rejecting the use of the Indian symbol and helping to usher in co-education. Thank you, Dr. Kilmarx, for all of your contributions.
Thank you, Meredith. And cousin Annie sends her regrets. She's voting in favor of having a commission to investigate the events of January 6th. Otherwise, she would be with us.
Great, thank you for that. Drew Manis, Thayer, class of 83, and Chief of Perioperative Medicine Department at the Clinical Center, husband of DC Club board member Julie Manis. As Chief of the Clinical Center's Department of Perioperative Medicine, your team is involved in cutting-edge research to address pain and find alternatives to addiction pain medications like opioids, a treatment which you observed early in your career had not changed much in the last 1,000 years. Developing pain therapies by using gene therapy, targeting pain pathways with selective agonists, toxins, or fusion proteins, and improving the diagnosis of disease states using proteomic and genomic techniques places you at the leading edge of a critical area to promote health and well-being for people with injury, disability, and chronic conditions. At the Clinical Center, you collaborate with the Pain and Palliative Care Service in the area of pain management, and you have also worked on the treatment of chronic pain with investigators from several of the NIH intramural programs. Your education reflects your multidimensional mind and approach to problem solving. Following completion of a Bachelor of Science degree in bioengineering at the University of Pennsylvania and a Master of Engineering degree at Thayer, you received your medical degree at GW. During your anesthesia residency at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital, you also completed a fellowship in pain management. More recently, you received your MBA from the University of Maryland. Your Dartmouth connections run deep as well. Your father was in the class of 55. You have two brothers who graduated in the 80s. Your wife, Julie, as we mentioned, is an 86. You have a son who's a 16 and a daughter-in-law who's a 16, a son class of 17 and a daughter class of 20. So another wonderful example of the multi-generational impact of Dartmouth and the Dartmouth education. Thank you, Dr. Manis, for all of your contributions.
Thank you, Meredith, for running this tonight.
You're welcome. Dr. Masur, class of 68 and Chief of the Critical Care Medicine Department at NIH Clinical Center. Dr. Masur is known internationally for his expertise in the management of HIV and its comorbidities and expertise in ICU-related infections. He received his undergraduate from Dartmouth and his medical degree from Cornell Medical School. He completed his internship and residency in internal medicine at New York Hospital and Johns Hopkins, and did a fellowship at Cornell in infectious disease and internal medicine. He was recruited to NIH to jointly found a new Department of Critical Care Medicine and an HIV/AIDS program with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And when I read about your career, Dr. Masur, I really thought so much about how you were really forming the department and setting up the research programs for a period in our health history that was so much at the forefront as I was coming into my formative time, end of high school and beginning of college. And I think knowing how much you had an impact on discovery and treatment for HIV and AIDS, was very meaningful and impactful to understand that. You became Chief of Critical Care, the Critical Care Medicine Department at NIH in 1989, and you managed the Clinical Center's Medical Surgical ICU, and you also managed respiratory therapy and the code team. As I said, your department has international acclaim in areas of treating sepsis, emerging infections, HIV/AIDS, lung biology, and sickle cell disease. And it has had a wide and broad impact on many treatments that are happening in this area. And we'll learn tonight during the conversation led by Susan Denster more about how your department and others have responded in the era of COVID. With that, I wanted to thank everyone for their contributions and let the camera turn back to you all if it's not there, so that we can have you all be applauded by all of us for your wonderful careers, which are still ongoing, and the contributions you have made and will continue to make in the future to medicine and to the health and well-being of populations in our country and the world at large. So thank you. I don't know if we're doing a virtual clap. And if the awardees want to hold up their awards for the audience to see, you are welcome to do that. Wonderful. It does feel a little anticlimactic, I think, on a virtual awards evening, but thank you all. And now I want to segue to the conversation that Susan Dentzer is going to lead. So I just want to check if I'm up with the slides. Great, perfect. Thank you. So Susan Dentzer is joining us again for our second virtual Webster as our moderator, and we are really grateful for that. Susan is from the class of '77. I know she's very well known to the Dartmouth community and a beloved member of our DC Dartmouth community. In 2004, we honored her with the Webster Award, and she served Dartmouth in many capacities over the years, including as chair of the Board of Trustees and currently as a member of the Board of Trustees at Geisel. I'm personally grateful for the guidance that she provided to me and Meg Sommerfeld from the class of '90, past president of this club, as we launched a Women of Dartmouth DC alumni community about 6 years ago. Susan didn't hesitate to join us in moderating a panel last year when we gave the award to Jerry Cox from the VA. And we thank you for serving again as our moderator tonight, Susan. And we know you've planned a great conversation with the awardees. Before I turn it over to you, I wanted to let the audience know to share your questions with me in the chat feature of your Zoom. I'll be helping to pull questions together for Susan and for the audience Q&A, which we'll turn to in about 30 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Take it away, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meredith, and good evening to all of you. It's great to be with you, and let us hope this is the last virtual Webster Award we'll have to do for quite a while. It's really an honor to be here with our awardees tonight, Leighton, Peter, Drew, and Henry. Their work is, as you heard from Meredith, just extraordinary. And now I am the lucky person who gets to lead a conversation with them as we delve a little bit deeper into the very important areas of research each of them has conducted. So I'm going to ask them a bit one by one about these areas of research. And Leighton, I'd love to start with you. As Meredith mentioned, your research spans very exciting and very different areas, all the way from rare lung disease to traumatic brain injury. And you also, and this is close to my heart, you conduct a very different type of research called health services research, where you look at disparities in the health and the well-being of people within the population, especially people with disabilities. So I'm curious as to how you came to have such a breadth of those research interests. And given that the pandemic has thrust before us very much in the limelight the issue of disparities, especially and including people with disabilities, how has the pandemic, in your view, specifically affected the disabled population?
Dr. Chan, you're still on mute.
I think you're muted, Leighton.
Sorry. You'd think after a year doing this, I'd figure out and unmute myself. Well, thank you so much for those questions, Susan. And I think I'll start with the second one first, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Certainly when a pandemic hit, there was a great deal of concern among individuals with disabilities and their caretakers and their loved ones that group, which is very broad and very heterogeneous, would be at increased risk. They obviously have more comorbidities. Many of them live in group homes, which would be like a smaller nursing home, so they would be more at risk. Some struggle to deal with PPE and masks. Others have issues around caretakers and issues with social distancing and that. So there were a whole host of reasons why that group of individuals were more at risk. And unfortunately, the early data suggests that those risk factors have had a fairly profound effect on mortality. And if you look at some of the data coming out of England, some of the data that just came out of Syracuse, that the mortality rates for individuals with disabilities is anywhere between 6 and 10 times higher. So hopefully that will get better with vaccination. But yes, your question is a pretty profound one, and it speaks to the aggressive and unfortunate nature of this virus.
And just quickly, we know now that immunocompromised individuals now are particularly at risk, and especially in terms of vaccination, which can only compound the difficulties for this population, correct?
Absolutely. So vaccination is just one big step, but it's not the end of this whole process. And there are a whole host of groups that are still at risk that we still need to figure out how to care for. Many individuals with disabilities do have issues related to immunocompromise, or they've had adverse reactions to vaccine before. So yes, it's an ongoing issue.
So back to my first question about how you ended up with this very diverse area, breadth of interest. How did that come about?
Well, I was a government major at Dartmouth, and so I'd always had an interest in big picture things, 30,000-foot level type analyses. And when I finished residency, I was looking around and I found a fellowship that would sort of combine my interest in medicine and also policy and healthcare delivery. And that was the Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholars Fellowship. And that fellowship very much changed my early career. And I worked very hard on health services research, published a variety of papers looking at one that was in the New England Journal, actually looked at how women versus men are treated after an acute heart attack, showing that women are less aggressively treated, not surprisingly, in the way that you might know about. And I did a number of those type of studies over the course of about a decade. And I found that disparity work, although important, at some level, it's like throwing off a firecracker. There's a big bang and everyone looks and says, okay. But it doesn't necessarily provide solutions, or at least my work didn't. So one of the reasons I went to NIH was to get back to something that was a little bit more treatment oriented, something that would actually change the way we manage patients. And NIH and the Clinical Center is all about clinical trials, where we're comparing one treatment over another, and natural history studies in which we look at rare diseases. And that's one of the reasons I ended up at NIH. And I have an interest for a variety of reasons in lung disease, and I have an interest for a variety of reasons in traumatic brain injury. And so I tend to focus on those two topics currently.
And as we know, traumatic brain injury, TBI, was very, very much in the news during the recent wars that we've been fighting in the US. And I'm sure you were able to contribute greatly to our understanding of what exactly happens in TBI in those circumstances.
Absolutely. So one of the great things about NIH is that it's right across the street from Walter Reed. I mean, it's really 200 yards from the premier medical military medical center. And so we've had this long collaboration between NIH and Walter Reed that spans almost a decade now. In many ways, this is the golden age of traumatic brain injury research. There's a lot of interest, there's a lot of funding, and we're making great strides. We're not there yet, but we have certainly made great strides in understanding what the enemy and enemies are in terms of pathophysiology and traumatic brain injury.
Well, great. And perhaps we'll have time to circle back and hear a little bit more about that particular area of your research, Leighton. I want to move to Peter next. Peter, as Meredith said again, you also have a great breadth of interests and a very varied background. You focused on infectious disease research, HIV/AIDS. You had an active role in 2 different eras of the Ebola epidemic, serving with the CDC in several countries in Africa. And now as deputy director at the Fogarty Center, which really is the epicenter of the international focus that exists at NIH. You've also been obviously very deeply involved in the pandemic response globally. So based on your experience with Ebola, how and what about the COVID-19 pandemic struck you as a bit of, as Yogi Berra would have said, deja vu all over again? And what's been different from your perspective about these 2 different epidemics and pandemics?
Well, thank you, Susan, for great questions and for also moderating our discussion and taking the time to be with us. I just want to say it's really a huge honor for me to be included in this award. Public service is really a family tradition, and I'm very fortunate to be included with this distinguished group of NIH colleagues, and I'm proud to follow in the footsteps of my cousin Annie, as has been mentioned, and would also note that my classmate Leighton and I are the 2nd and 3rd members of the class of '83 to be awarded following Tim Geithner in 2011. But for your question, I would start with a really big difference is really the massive size and scope of COVID-19 compared to Ebola. COVID's really truly a pandemic with more than 3.4 million deaths to date, which is certainly an undercount. And in comparison, the biggest Ebola outbreak in West Africa had a total of 11,000 reported deaths, 11,325, which was terrible, but there were 14,000 COVID-19 deaths worldwide yesterday. So a single day, more than the total number of Ebola deaths in the West Africa outbreak. But an important similarity in a real deja vu experience is these issues of misinformation and distrust. In West Africa, there was this proliferation of rumors that Ebola was a scheme to either postpone elections or to enrich elites that were getting contracts for Ebola response activities. And even months and months into the outbreak, just the simple message, Ebola is real, was still very important to convey. And now with COVID-19, we're seeing even worse, this deliberate disinformation motivated by people seeking political power or trying to enrich themselves. And even we're seeing these malign forces trying to divide and diminish our society. So big parts of the solution is to find trusted messengers. In Guinea, we funded Peace Corps staff to train high school teachers as trusted messengers for community Ebola education. And in the US, we're working with family doctors and other frontline healthcare workers to promote COVID vaccination. I'd say another big difference between the experience with Ebola and with COVID-19 is the challenges that we had that we're seeing with the Ebola research, the treatment and vaccine trials in West Africa, where the health capacity was so weak, the health research capacity particularly. And then in contrast, the amazing advances we're seeing with COVID-19 research, especially vaccination. And this started with a really relatively rapid sharing of the SARS-CoV-2 genetic sequence from China, where the health research infrastructure is very strong. So clinical research infrastructure is now considered a part of pandemic preparedness. And this aligns very well with our mission at Fogarty in building health research capacity in lower income countries.
Some of your colleagues at other areas within NIH are conducting research on more than 24 different viral families that infect human beings and have pandemic potential. As we contemplate the prospect that this is not going to be likely our last pandemic, what do you think the world needs to do to be better prepared next time?
Well, I think we can say with confidence this is not our last pandemic. And from our perspective, we really see the importance of building the capacity of especially the human capacity So at Fogarty, we've been training people, research leaders for over 30 years, and we're really gratified to see some of the great leaders and the national responses in Africa and Asia and the Americas, some of the head of the Africa CDC. These are all former Fogarty trainees. So we think that really training people up, building that research capacity, because we don't know if where the next outbreak is coming from. And if it's coming from a place where there's poor research capacity to develop the medical countermeasures, the diagnostics, the treatments, the vaccines, it's really starting from way behind if that capacity isn't already there.
Well, we're very glad that you're at the helm at Fogarty and able to continue the process of getting the world ready, not just to see us through this pandemic, but the next one as well, Peter. Thank you. Drew, I would like to go to you next. As we heard again from Meredith, your primary research interest has been severe pain, especially severe pain at the end of life. The other equally tragic pandemic that we haven't talked about quite as much in the past year as the COVID pandemic is the opioids use pandemic. And we know that that also has gotten worse during the COVID pandemic. Given that one focus of your work has been about finding alternatives to opioids, such as morphine and fentanyl, for the relief of severe pain, including some work, interesting work really, that you and colleagues did on a naturally occurring plant molecule dubbed RTX that also is an effective pain reliever. How close do you think both the basic research area and the translational research areas are now to coming up with really effective pain relievers that are not as addictive as opioids and thus will create many fewer risks for patients?
That is an interesting area right now. As we know, or it's probably for about the last 5,000 years, since the Sumerians, we've been using the same molecule, which is morphine, to treat severe pain. And in advances that everybody's touted in pain relief have really we're using slightly different formulations, dilaudid or fentanyl or other drugs we hear about, or how we deliver the drug itself. I mean, that is, we maybe will do an intrathecal pump or fentanyl, patches or some other way of administering the drug. We really just haven't changed that drug at all. It's the same thing with the same complications that we have. And it's, been very addictive. Now people have tried to come with less addictive drugs. And when we look at it, the OxyContin was, originally touted to be non-addictive or less addictive than the other drugs. And it's also historically, we can remember the Bayer group in 1898, they came out with this fabulous new drug. They were worried back then about the addiction to morphine. So they came out with this new drug, which they said was not addictive. And of course, that was called heroin. And we know that really didn't work out much as OxyContin did. When we look at addiction, it's still a phenomenal problem where we have over 100 people a day dying from overdoses. And it's probably hard pressed to find somebody now who doesn't have a friend or a relative or somebody they knew who has died from an overdose. There are very few drugs right now. There are a lot of drugs in development, but a lot of them sort of maybe are another variation of morphine, et cetera. There are some old drugs that have been recycled for pain. We look at ketamine. Ketamine now is being used for pain more frequently. Although it has its problems, in larger doses, it can cause hallucination or actually general anesthesia if you give a large enough dose. And of course, it's yet another abusable drug. But again, it's starting to find its place with trying to replace the opiates. Our project, resinifera toxin, RTX, because it's so much easier to say that, is from a natural plant product. It's from Euphorbia resinifera, which is a succulent plant that's from Morocco, although it can be found from other sources. And it itself has been used for thousands of years for treating pain, but most people just hadn't heard of it. A lot of work was done with NIH, and it was now rediscovered, the receptor which targets. So the resinifera toxin, which we're right now doing a clinical trial for severe pain, is a fabulous drug in that we give it, and if we give it centrally, it's a one-time dose. It lasts for as long as you live. And again, now that we're in clinical trials, in the cancer population, it seems to be extremely promising. with this. And we have just a few more patients to go. I hope to be done the trial and probably try to publish it maybe as early as the end of the year. And again, we're also looking forward to other applications of this drug for post-surgical pain. There's another group we're helping with facial pain. It's actually being used now for knee joint injections. So as a replacement for knee replacement surgery, probably one of the most common surgeries now. And that again seems very promising. Again, here's a drug that has no abuse potential. It's not addictive at all. And again, it seems to work quite well.
That really makes it, it sounds like, you'll forgive the phrase, a wonder drug, if it could be that effective and also non-addictive. That's
it has its place. If we give it centrally, which is like intrathecally, like a spinal anesthetic, that's when it lasts for as long as you live. If you give it peripherally, say in the knee, it lasts for a prolonged period of time and recover it. But remember, we really need pain. If we didn't have pain, we wouldn't know when we were injuring our body. We wouldn't know, and let's say if your appendix was, we generally, we have right lower quadrant pain. We know when somebody is having appendicitis because of that pain. So if we take all the pain away, that could be problematic. But there's certain cases and certain way we can deliver it that would take advantage of this and be able to provide profound relief. And again, and as a non-opioid type drug. Trying to get through the FDA. Now the question, go back to your question, is how soon is it going to be ready? We've learned a lot about the FDA with COVID, how difficult sometimes it is to get a drug through the FDA. And again, they're doing their job. They're making sure that we are safe. And remember, these vaccines now are under emergency use. So again, we have to go back, and even though we complete the study at the end of the year, we'll probably have to do a larger study and then go back to the FDA to see about getting released as a new drug. And we partnered with a company outside of NIH. NIH is we're very good at drug discovery, especially drug discovery for, as you had mentioned, for rare diseases and other areas that other companies would have no incentive to go after. But we go to these companies, we make our discoveries, and then we pass the baton on to let's say a pharmaceutical company, who then can go and go on to a commercialization of the product. So my thought is it's going to be, it'll be a few years before we see our product out there. And again, other drugs are in the pipeline, but again, it's some of them are old and some are really just minor variations of current drugs.
Well, I have a feeling there are going to be plenty of Dartmouth alums waiting to hear if they can forego a knee replacement in favor of taking a drug like that. So good luck.
Well, that trial is actually underway, and they've done the phase 1 clinical trial, and I think their phase 2 trial. I think they're going to a phase 3 trial. So again, that may be fairly close to, may just be a couple years away from being released.
Okay, well, we'll all stay tuned. Thank you. So Henry, to go to you next, again, as Meredith said, you were instrumental in founding the critical care medicine department at NIH. You also launched an HIV/AIDS program at another one of the NIH institutes, and you recently served on a panel that developed NIH's own COVID-19 treatment guidelines. That had to have been an extraordinary assignment, given how quickly and enormously the clinical understanding of COVID changed from the early days of the pandemic right up now to through the present. I'm wondering what you think was the most surprising or most interesting or daunting set of discoveries around COVID and the treatment of COVID that you encountered as you did this work, and how did or did not that experience of discovery correlate with a similar experience that you no doubt went through as we were attempting to understand HIV/AIDS decades ago?
One of the intriguing things about a career in medicine is medicine changes and unpredictable things happen. And we each chose our specialty for a reason. But in infectious disease, as Peter suggested, the next pandemic or the next challenge is coming. We just don't know when or what it will be. And one of the real advantages of working in a place like NIH is that either you can have tremendous impact globally and nationally in terms of helping develop programs across the country, or like Peter does internationally, or you can work on campus where we are funded to tackle problems, which either you can pursue for years or you can respond to problems that you see. In the hospital, we take care of patients when we see, for instance, HIV coming, and we see our hospitals filling with pneumocystis pneumonia or cryptococcal pneumonia, cryptococcal meningitis. It presents a challenge that suddenly you shift your focus and you look at ways that you can do research to develop new diagnostics, new therapeutics, new prevention methods. But each time a new challenge comes up, you use the infrastructure and the knowledge that you learn on HIV, on West Nile, on anthrax, on COVID, so that you can meet the next challenge. COVID has been both distressing and exciting in that it isn't anything what we would have thought a new viral process would be. Its transmissibility was a surprise. The complications that one gets with COVID, particularly, for instance, the unexpected strokes and heart attacks and venous thrombosis were not what we expected. So this means that we have an opportunity or a challenge to quickly look to see why this is occurring, and both in our hospitals and working with colleagues at other places, try to understand what the mechanism is and then find a solution. I have to say, I think that the United States should be proud of what NIH and the FDA and the CDC have done, because I think even though it's very distressing, the number of people who have been sick and died, we have made a tremendous amount of progress in a year. I think a lot of that is because the federal government had the infrastructure, the federal government had the funds to create the research on the campus, nationally and internationally, that has led us to so much progress. I think the other thing about working at NIH is you can work on a local level in the hospital, you can work on a national level, but also an important part of what we do is also making sure that the public understands the science and has access to the science. And in terms of guidelines, I think one of the most gratifying things I've been involved with is in the 1990s, we started doing guidelines for HIV so that there was a credible, objective source of information. And particularly in that era, when there were a lot of things in the news that came out in the published literature, we thought we had a big challenge to deal with that. And thus we had guidelines that would come out regularly from the government that were objective, and they've been very popularly used. We didn't realize that 30 years later, what we thought was a lot of information coming out would suddenly explode on the internet and with Twitter. And now there's even more of a need to have a reliable, credible, current source of information. And there are very few organizations that have the capacity that the federal government has to create a guideline that is updated every week or every 2 weeks with a thorough review of recent literature, so that providers and the public know what the best science is right now. So you said at the beginning that we all work for a federal agency, and I think each of us has taken a somewhat different path, but this really shows the strength of what the federal government can do. I think often the public doesn't or underestimates the role that both NIH and the other agencies have in quickly moving things to make the progress that we have made with HIV, with hepatitis C, and now with COVID.
Absolutely. NIH is a national treasure, to be sure. Well, a couple of questions have come in from the audience for several of you, so I'd like to take those now. First of all, Leighton, I think we'll hand this one to you. Is anybody at NIH involved in CTE research? Obviously, CTE, another form of brain injury. Tell us about, I assume the answer to that is yes, what research is going on about CTE at NIH?
Right, so lots. CTE stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and it's become almost a household acronym these days because of its link to sports and football and hockey. And it's essentially a disease that's associated with chronic trauma to the brain. There's a lot of work in this area, primarily now in trying to figure out how to diagnose it when people are still alive. So to date, CTE has been a post-mortem diagnosis. So somebody dies and you do an autopsy and you look at the brain and you see these abnormal proteins called tau proteins all throughout the brain. But they're not something that you can see with a normal MRI or a CAT scan. So a lot of the funding and effort right now is moving towards identifying ways to see these proteins while individuals are living. And I think we've made some good progress there. We don't have anything yet in terms of what's called a PET ligand, which is a special protein that would light up with a special imaging study. We don't have one yet that's FDA approved, but we got some promising ones. And so that would be great, at least to begin to diagnose it. How do we treat it? I think we're still pretty far away from it. There are some other tauopathies that are unrelated to trauma that we can look to. But from a public health standpoint, I think the most important thing is many young athletes and parents have become aware of this, avoiding chronic brain trauma. And in talking to your pediatrician, getting good, solid information about what the risks are and what do you do when your child or your son or your daughter has a concussion.
Great, thank you. Henry, here's a question I think is right up your alley. Can you comment on studies showing the absence of antibodies in compromised individuals who are vaccinated?
It's not really a surprise that people who have altered immunity can't respond to vaccines. This is one of the reasons why we advocate everyone getting vaccinated, because if you have some people who are not vaccinated and they get the disease, the other susceptible people are not going to be the other people you worry about are not going to be the people who have good immunity. It's the people who have bad immunity, because they're much more susceptible to severe disease and they're not likely to respond to vaccines. So we need to protect them by vaccinating all the people around them. But again, it's not a surprise, and it's a growing population. It's people who get many of these new monoclonal antibodies for their rheumatoid arthritis, for cancer, for inflammatory bowel disease. So there's a sizable population that we have to be concerned about. So again, I know there's an article in the Post this morning about this. There's no great surprise that if you knock out your B cells or your T cells, that you're not going to be able to respond to a vaccine. Now, it's worth, as long as it's not a live vaccine, it's worth trying to vaccinate them and to trying to get their antibody level up. But you have to recognize that in many of those people, it's not going to be successful.
Great. Peter, a question for you. You talked about the experience of Ebola and the misinformation and disinformation that circulated then, and how much that has in common with the current situation with COVID. How do we particularly sustain important and accurate messages for poor communities in particular, and more vulnerable communities here in the United States, make sure that they have the support and understand really the truth about COVID, about vaccines, and so on?
Thanks, Susan. It's really, a wicked problem. It's been identified even pre-COVID as a major global health threat. This disinformation and infodemic that we're having now with COVID. So in each of these cases, it's really doing a kind of market segmentation and finding out, who are the decision makers in a family, in a community. Who do people listen to in terms of these topics, and finding them and partnering with them and working with them. So in West Africa, we were working with imams in the churches. We were working with women's groups. We were working, as I said, with the high school teachers and educating them. In the US, I think what we're seeing is that it's really evolving over time. That as more and more information becomes available, that many people are shifting over being more accepting. They wanted to see more of their community, more of their contacts being vaccinated. And it's really just figuring out in these communities, who do they get their trusted information from? Is it a country music star? Is it a sports player? More likely it's someone actually in their community who can influence them. But we also have to recognize there's really these malign forces, as I said, other countries, people that are really, it's beyond just sort of a public health communication issue. It's really at some level also a health security issue or a national security issue, and beyond the public health community to address it.
That's great. Well, I'd like to turn the conversation back to Dartmouth, since we all have that in common. And I'd love to hear each of you perhaps tell me a formative story, an anecdote, an insight about your Dartmouth experience that informed who you became in your professional life as physicians and researchers, or perhaps in your personal life, and really shaped who you are today. And Drew, let's start with you on that.
All right. Thayer was an interesting place. That's where I discovered my engineering interest in developing medical devices. I had a mentor there who was just incredible, Fred Hooven. This is somebody who just had an amazing background. He learned to fly from the Wright brothers. He went on to design a navigational piece of equipment for Amelia Earhart, which she decided not to use in the flight, which she was never found after. But he had done front wheel drive for cars. I mean, he just was a just inspirational person. And he was the person who was my inspiration for my thesis project, which was a low cost IV controller. And we actually went on and patented my work when I was at Dartmouth for the device. And I think it was the process of taking an idea, from paper and then and having the frustration of developing prototypes and then turning into a marketable device that really developed, like an understanding of patients, the intestinal fortitude, basically to move forward with a concept. And I think it was that background which has helped me throughout my medicine career. And it's funny because I just keep coming back to engineering. And the latest project we're working on, again, going back to my engineering, is I'm part of a team, a multi-institutional team now, which is developing a ventilator for COVID. As we remember, there was a huge problem with stacking ventilators because we didn't have enough, and being able to mobilize the equipment, et cetera. And it's a ventilator the size of a lipstick tube, and it has no moving parts. And it works. It's a full-fledged. It's a ventilator that you can put onto an endotracheal tube and ventilate somebody, keep them alive. We just finished the large animal study at NIH, and we're just about to publish that. Sending out the manuscript, and I'm writing a clinical protocol to do this on OR patients in the future. So again, it was just that desire to find new ideas and to follow them through regardless of the frustrations and everything else that you may have.
What a great story. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Henry, I would put the same question to you, a formative episode or story about your career at Dartmouth that has shaped who you are today.
As you mentioned at the beginning, one of the interesting things is as you enter the healthcare field, there's so many Dartmouth graduates that you meet who influence you. I see, for instance, Bob Wilkins is on the call here. You meet people in the community who are important influences in terms of teaching. You meet people in your specific discipline. You meet people at NIH like Leighton and Drew and Peter who are having an impact. So I think in one way it's the Dartmouth network that sustains you. But I guess one of my great memories is a friendship that started on the Green. I sort of knew most of the other pre-meds when I was there, but I remember one that I didn't know very well. Spring of my senior year, walked up to me and said, I think we're going to the same medical school, and we might as well get to know each other. And that was a member of my class, Joe Perillo, and we became friends. And he has actually turned out to have somebody who had tremendous impact on my life because he was always much more advanced than I was. So he was one of the Tony Fauci's proteges. And when the AIDS epidemic was starting, I'd known Joe. He had already become the head of critical care at NIH, and he was looking for somebody to come and start an AIDS program. So it was really that Dartmouth connection that Joe said, we might as well bring Henry down from New York. And maybe it would have happened for other reasons, but it was really that friendship that started at Dartmouth. And Joe has been although we're in the same class, a mentor as well as a friend and a colleague for 40 years ever since.
Again, a wonderful story of the Green Network that we are all so proud to be a part of. So Leighton, same question to you. Formative experience?
Well, I guess I would turn to the Dartmouth plan, the Dartmouth plan that allowed us to be off campus during the fall and the winter. And I spent the winter of my junior year working for actually a guy who won this award many years ago, a guy named Paul Tsongas, who was a senator from Massachusetts. And I was a government major at the time, and that experience led me to two conclusions. One is I didn't want to be a lawyer, but that government is this sort of miraculous thing. It's not something we should complain about. It's something we need to care and feed, and it can enrich us if we take it seriously, if we become part of it, if we become part of the process. And if you become part of the process, you can actually affect change. And I think that has never left me. Part of the reason I went into health services research was because of that. I spent some additional time with Jim McDermott, who was a congressman from Seattle, which I think he still is, who was sort of this lone voice for single payer healthcare for decades. And finally now we're now getting around to the fact that maybe we'll get something like that eventually. But I think that experience, the way in which you could go off campus, not be competing with a gazillion other students and get some really fantastic experiences and internships is what I would point to.
You're going to make us all want to go back and do it all over again, Leighton. Thank you. So Peter, last word to you about your formative Dartmouth experience.
Thanks, Susan. So I, certainly credit my friends and classmates from Dartmouth for who I am and for continuing to keep me on track and be great friends. But I'd also, like Leighton, talk about the foreign study, which is kind of part of the same package of the Dartmouth plan. And remarkably, the genesis for that was in the start of coeducation in the 1970s, when some alumni said, okay, you can admit women, but you can't admit any fewer men, because that would degrade the competitiveness of Dartmouth athletics. So the brilliant solution was adding a lot more students was to go to year-round education in the Dartmouth plan, and then to expand the foreign study program. So I spent one term studying French in Blois, and one term studying marine biology at UCSD, which I guess was kind of like a foreign country. Then my final term studying terrestrial and marine ecology in Costa Rica and Jamaica. So for me, Dartmouth was truly a kind of a base camp to the world, as the admissions office now likes to say. And I would quote Dartmouth College President John Sloan Dickey used to say, the world's problems are your problems. And we're really flipping that around to say the world's solutions are your solutions, which is how we see it from Fogarty. And really that perspective came from my Dartmouth experience.
Well, what a great note to end on, because the solutions that all of you are in the business of devising at NIH, at the Clinical Center and at Fogarty are so important and are going to relieve so much suffering and so much pain and extend the lives of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Americans, as well as many people around the world. I know somewhere tonight, Daniel Webster is smiling He is smiling because that small college he referred to years ago, now maybe a medium-sized university, more so than a small college, has produced such illustrious contributing members of society as all of you. And it's been an honor really to be with you tonight as you receive the Webster Award, and we wish you all the best in your future work. Thank you very much. And now I'll turn this back over to Meredith and her colleagues.
Hi there, and this is Yasuto. I'll just make a few last comments as we close out. First, just want to give one last round of applause to the awardees. So if you want to take yourself off mute and just applaud, feel free to do so now. Thank you, and then thank you all for all that you have done and continue to do in your careers. And Kevin will share his screen again, and I just want to thank the people who helped put this together as well. As he gets that up, one thing I wanted to note as well is that we do hope that this will be one of our last virtual events that our club holds, given the prevalence of the COVID-19 vaccine and the recent guidance by the CDC that vaccinated people can begin gathering again. Of course, we're going to follow the college's recommendations, but our current plan is actually to hold an in-person Webster Award in this fall, just to honor these 4 recipients from this year, as well as the recipient from last year, Dr. Jerry Cox of the class of '79, who also had a virtual event and who I believe is actually with us tonight. So please stay tuned for announcements early in the fall about a plan for an in-person event if we are able to do so. I want to thank the people you see on the screen here. These are all volunteers on our Webster committee. These are all board members who dedicated time to put this together. So Erica, Mia, Peter, Jennifer, Liza, Bob, Kevin, who is actually in the background running the slides and a lot of the spotlighting tonight. Betty, Grace, and Jeremy, just thank you all for, again, putting this event together. And the last thing I wanted to note is that this will actually be my last event as president of the Dartmouth Club of DC, as I'll be heading off to business school at Northwestern Kellogg to take a next step in my career. But the board of directors will select an interim president this summer. And then the full club will have an opportunity to vote on the new leadership team of the club in our annual holiday dinner this December. So I just wanted to state that it's truly been a pleasure to have the opportunity to serve the Dartmouth community in this way. And that if you are ever interested in getting involved with the leadership of the club yourself, again, we're an all volunteer run group of DC based alumni. So you can, even if you just want to plan an event or two, just send an email to dartmouthclubofdc@gmail.com. And we'll reach out and we'll discuss the best way for you to jump in. And again, in the fall, we have our holiday dinner, which is also our annual membership meeting in which we vote on the new board of directors for every 2-year term. Now, before we adjourn, please join us in the tradition of singing the alma mater. Kevin will play it quietly in the background, but if you are brave enough to do so, we invite you to take yourself off mute and sing along as our last part of the evening.
Dear old
Dartmouth,
give
give
a
rose for the college on the hill,
for the
lone
biographer,
biographer,
and the
for the
true ones
ones
who
who
love
love
her.
her. Dear
For
for
the
the
sons
sons
of
of
old
old
Dartmouth,
Dartmouth,
for
for
the
the
daughters
daughters
of
of
Dartmouth,
Dartmouth,
around
around
the
the
earth
earth
there
there
are
are
12 of them remain.
remains.
They have
Have
it
it
still
still
north
north
in
in
their
their
hearts,
hearts,
the
the
hill
hill winds
winds in
in
their
their
veins,
veins,
and the
and the
granite
granite
of
of
New
New
Hampshire
Hampshire,
in their
their
muscles
muscles
and
and
their
their
brains,
brains,
and the
and the
granite
granite
of
of
New
New
Hampshire
Hampshire,
in
their
their muscles
muscles
and
and
their
their
brains.
brains.
Dear old Dartmouth
Dartmouth
set
set
a
a
watch,
watch,
lest the
let's the
old
old
tradition
traditions fail.
fail. Stand
This
assist
distance,
my
my
brother,
brother,
dare a deed
achieve
the old
so
mother.
another.
Hills with a hill, for the sons of Dartmouth,
and for the
daughters
daughters
of
of Dartmouth,
around the world to
dun, dun, oh, 7.
have in there.
The hill
There
winds
winds in their breath,
and
and
the
the
granite
of
New
New
Hampshire
Hampshire is made part of
them
them
till
death.
and the
Granite
granite
of
of New
New
Hampshire is made
part of
Thank you for taking part in that with us.
This will be a
Thank you
fascinating
again.
recording to listen to.
Thank you again for joining us all tonight. Hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Good luck, Yasudo.
Thank you.
Bye,